Happy to be joined by the man behind the mic, Jon Anik, who's going to be calling all the action at UFC 307. And of course, we had that great event at UFC 306. We'll get into that as well. Jon, how are you doing, man? How's everything?
Oh, I'm doing good. I know we did not have the chance to catch up on the front end of Noche UFC. I'm still digesting all that was that Sphere show. But yeah, man, 307 hits hard. Salt Lake City, most of the athletes as of this taping, well on their way to Salt Lake City, if not already having boots on the ground. So I'll be there huffing and puffing on the treadmill in a few days.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's quickly talk about 306. Again, huge event, totally understandable. I mean, everything we saw what the event ended up being with the presentation and all that. I got to ask though, you've had a lot of, amazing calls, a lot of career highlights in your career. Where does this one rank getting to call that card? Because it was pretty special.
Well, my recall isn't the best. Certainly, I think fondly, even back to the ESPN MMA Live days when I'm just up in the rafters on a desk watching Shogun, Rua, and Lyoto Machida in Montreal, right? But for me, this is tops, at least in terms of a broadcasting experience. I'm not sure anything aesthetically would ever top it. And I think for a lot of us on the UFC Live production team, we're happy to have this first one in the can. And yes, I say first one because I am expectant that we're going to run that back at the Sphere at some point. However long it takes, who knows? But just so many special components to it. And not to suggest that it went off without a hitch, but just so thankful to be a part of it. And I don't even know what is playing at Sphere when people descend upon Las Vegas, but you got to go check out that venue, and hopefully there are more live sporting events there to come. And yeah, shining moment for a lot of Mexican athletes and Mexican coaches. And bro, like you were not in the building, James. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I wasn't. No, unfortunately. My son had his 3rd birthday, so I couldn't miss it.
Priorities. No, I get it. So you have been at some of the biggest UFC live events, and
I would say
you could even talk about some of the stadium shows, of course, in your nation and in Melbourne, right? And some of the festive atmospheres we've had in Perth, Western Australia, and even in the US. There's no comp for this show, and that's why, as I spin it forward, all I can think about, bro, is putting on the greatest fight card in UFC history with whatever theme at Sphere again. Let's run it back, kid. Let's run it back.
That's good. Spread the word. I think a lot of people want to see it. I want to go to the next one. You know where I was at the Sphere for the NHL draft, though? That was kind of neat. So I got to.
How was that?
It was awesome. Yeah. I got to go actually as media, which was cool. And, I even got to interview some of the players, which was awesome. Trying to be versatile in this industry, how important that is. But it was cool. Like, it was really amazing. I couldn't believe just the production that went into it. Like, even for something like that, I know UFC obviously took that to another level, but I was very impressed. Definitely want to go back at some point.
Well, like, how do you blow Joe Rogan's mind, right? He's seen it all. He has sat down with intellectuals from every corner of the world. And I got to see him walk into this venue for the first time. And what a special moment that was. And Daniel Cormier as well. I think DC had been in the building, but he hadn't actually seen the aesthetic. And yeah, we were very excited and very humbled. And, thankfully we barely made it back from our pay-per-view open vantage point in the 400s to the broadcast table in time to butcher the lead, but we'll do better next time.
You got a workout in it at the very least, which is good. Just quickly on the main event, obviously we have a new champion, Merab Dvalishvili. I think going in, a lot of people felt like O'Malley's either going to knock him out or Merab's going to win a decision. We see the Merab decision, but I will say I did not expect Merab to be that dominant in the fight. What did you think sort of going in and then seeing how it played out?
Well, it has me wondering how you beat Merab Dvalishvili and Valentina Shevchenko in their next fights, because they just look so dominant. And Merab here in particular just looks so quick that all DC and I were thinking about was handicapping an Umar Nurmagomedov fight, right? And how that might actually play out, because I think going into Merab and Sean O'Malley, a lot of people might have fancied Umar against either guy, and maybe now they're not so sure, just given how dominant Merab was. And guys like Merab Dvalishvili and Bilal Muhammad are never going to get credit for what they do as strikers if they have a nice jab or a nice point of entry. But, man, the total package of Merab, like, the dude needs to be tested for science, right? And, yeah, I'm saying that maybe for comedic value, but what is inside of there, right? I'm sure you've heard Colby Covington talk about the third lung he realized he had when he was 8 years old playing soccer. But there's just something about this champion, this unbreakable will, combined with this just cardiovascular base and strength. And if you take John Wood at his word, he's only getting better. So we'll see if he can start knocking some people out, but Merab's the man. Couldn't happen to a better human being, as trite as that may sound. And yeah, Georgia getting some things done. We'll see which nation is next.
And believe it or not, we already got UFC 307 coming up next weekend. The show goes on. We got the Paris card this Saturday, but interesting main event with Alex Pereira and Khalil Rountree. And obviously, you can say the usual things, 2 strikers, all this stuff. But one thing I was curious from your end, in some ways, I think people would say Khalil Rountree getting this shot was very much unexpected. And I think there's something very dangerous about that for Alex Pereira, in the sense that, Khalil Rountree wasn't supposed to have this. In fact, when I talked to him in July, there was a lot of uncertainty as when he was going to be able to fight again because of the issue that he had in the last scheduled fight against Jamal Hill. How much of that could play into this, just with the fact that, in some ways, Khalil Rountree is playing with house money in this fight?
Yeah, I mean, I like to lean into the intangibles, and I think to sort of dismiss this as an angle is probably a little bit of an ignorant handicap when it comes to this fight. Now, I've heard Jamal Hill, the former champion, and others suggest that Khalil Rountree Jr., with the southpaw stance and some of the weapons he has, could pose some real problems, and that absolutely is true. Yeah, strikers delight in many respects, right? And we'll see if Rountree Jr. can actually get Pereira to shoot. But James, if you look back at the career trajectory of Khalil Rountree Jr., one point in time, this man had lost 2 in a row, 3 of 4, coming off a loss to Marcin Prachnio. He's 8-5 as an MMA pro. And that's why you can argue this as one of the more unexpected championship opportunities and title shots in UFC history. What he does with it, I don't know. But it's tremendous to look at Alex Pereira. He'll have headlined 5 or 6 of the last 23 pay-per-views, and given a chance to all comers. I was with Yuri Prochazka in Perth, Western Australia, and seeing his reaction to Rountree Jr. getting the title fight was actually pretty funny. Just sort of wondering aloud, like, how exactly did this happen? But now we see what he can do with it. And hey, you could do worse things than win 5 straight fights, many of which 4 by knockout, in a division that isn't ripe with contenders. Like, bro, I know I'm going on, but like, you look at 55 this weekend. And I don't know who Renato Moicano pissed off, but like, how many tough matchup guys is he going to have to beat to get an eliminator? You know what I mean? With Saint-Denis and Jalen Turner and Brad Riddell. So at least at 205, opportunity knocks. We'll see what Khalil Rountree Jr. can do with it 5 October.
If Ankalaev wins against Rakic at 308, is it safe to assume that's going to be the next fight? I mean, I don't know what else Ankalaev needs to do at this point.
I don't know what he needs to do. I mean, I guess no yes or no questions, right? I really don't know. I could pose it back to you. On merit, in a straight meritocracy, I think we'd all agree Magomed Ankalaev is worthy of that opportunity. Yes, he did have an opportunity at the vacant belt, and it ended up being a draw. And even though that fight was compelling in its own way, for whatever reason, he has not been afforded another opportunity. I know a lot of the early betting lines suggest that he would be favored to beat Alex Pereira. I do think that would lead to some Pereira money coming in, but I understand why the fan base in a straight meritocracy wants to see this guy. And as we like to say on the Anik and Florian podcast, if it was the Anik and Florian Fighting Championships, Magomed Ankalaev would be fighting at altitude against Alex Pereira. But depending on who you believe, he didn't want the fight. So who knows?
That's not the only title fight on this card. We've got Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena. Actually, a lot of history here if you go back to the Ultimate Fighter and so many other, things that they've had over the years as far as them obviously they don't like each other, which is very interesting. But the one thing I'm curious on your end, the 2 years off for Pena, and obviously her last fight was against Amanda Nunes in their rematch, and it was a pretty dominant win for Amanda. How much will the cage rust affect Juliana in this fight, do you think, with Raquel just fighting back in January?
I don't worry about the cage rust. I'm not going to go so far to the other end of the spectrum and suggest, like Dominic Cruz, that it's not a factor. I mean, maybe it's a mental toughness quotient for him, who leads the league in mental toughness, but I think for a lot of fighters, it's tricky. It's amazing to listen to Juliana Pena's coaches, to a man, talk about her relative meanness and nastiness. Mm-hmm. They can't even get to the skills because Rick Little and Mike Valley both are just like, dude, meanest man or woman in the gym. You know what I mean? So I don't worry about her. I just think she's sort of one of these ultimate competitors. The layoff's not ideal. The injury history is not ideal. And Raquel Pennington just knows how to win fights and does not have a lot of weaknesses. Holly Holm has really been the only one who has been able to consistently stifle and frustrate her. Of course, we could talk about the GOAT Amanda Nunes as well. But yeah, it's a compelling fight for me. I like the heat on it. I like the friction. And I think Raquel looks like she's in really good shape and has maximized what has been some pretty appreciable time off for her as well. So, it's exciting. And I know Pennington's excited to get those Pereira pay-per-view points, I would think, as well.
Yeah. And then strategically, I think on this card as well, we have Kayla Harrison and Ketlin Vieira. I think safe to assume if Kayla wins this fight, it's got to be a title shot. I know she's only had one UFC fight, but you can already see how dominant that win was. And if she goes out there and does something similar, I think it's going to be pretty hard to deny.
Jimmy, what about Big Norm? What about Norma Dumont? Come on.
That's true. That's true. I mean, that's true. But we're going off hype, though. You go off the hype. I mean, there's a lot of hype behind Harrison, right?
I'm just joking around, of course.
Shout
out to Norman Dumont. And,
for sure. Gotta give her credit.
I sort of die on the hill of the Manon Fiors and the Norman Dumonts, right? Like Manon Fior needs to sit right now and wait for a title fight, no matter how big Rose Namajunas' name is or anybody else, So that's largely, the way I feel about that. But, it's there are a lot of these divisions that have like middleweight. They have great problems. It's like Brendan Allen, right? You've won 7 in a row. You reward Nassourdini Mavov on the road as a plus 180 underdog. The sport's crazy, but we're glad to be in it.
Speaking of underdogs, I was a bit surprised by this. Jose Aldo's an underdog against Mario Bautista on this card. What's your take on that? I know Aldo, again, has been off for a bit. He did the boxing and then came back and had a pretty good performance in his UFC return fight. And Mario Bautista, absolutely not counting him out at all. But I thought that was interesting, seeing Aldo as a rare underdog.
So Jose Aldo has turned back the clock. He has cashed in these spots before, in these y'all must have forgot type of spots. Look no further than his return fight against Jonathan Martinez. But Mario Bautista figures to be a different animal. I think brings sort of a different physicality. Those sparring Saturdays at the MMA Lab are legendary with Kyler Phillips and Sean O'Malley in the mix. And now Raul Rosas Jr. as well. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different components to it. I always expect Jose Aldo, when he shows up, to be close to prime form and competitive against any man in a couple of divisions. But I do think that when it comes to fighters being closer to fighting prime and on a certain trajectory, I believe in Mario Bautista. Just he's in one of these divisions in which it makes it exceedingly hard to make a run.
Anything else on this card that stand out to you? I'm actually looking forward to the Wonder Boy and Joaquin Buckley fight. That's like a sneaky good fight that they added on there.
Again, thematically, we come back to these divisions in which it's so hard to realize an opportunity. And I know that Kenny Florian doesn't like when I talk about 2-year championship setbacks. But if Ignacio Bahamondes loses to Manuel Torres at Noche UFC, it's a 2-year setback when it comes to probably getting to the top 15. So for Joaquin Buckley to have positioned himself for this fight and a matchup where, maybe you think it has some upside for him, I'm just happy for him because I'm sure a lot of my colleagues would take issue with this. I actually know some of my colleagues think his ceiling is lower than I do, but on any given Saturday night, put him on an NFL field as a running back on Sunday and unleash Joaquin Buckley. So yeah, I'm all about these guys who are just dying for opportunity, seemingly doing the right things, married to the game. And we'll see what Wonder Boy has at this stage of his career. Always a difficult puzzle, but Salt Lake City's loaded. UFC 308, I've said, might be the deepest card I've ever been assigned. So, Spears in the rearview mirror, much to, I think, the happiness of a lot of my colleagues. And we're on to 307, baby.
I'm really happy right now. NHL preseason underway. Do you got any NHL future bets placed right now? A team I'm keeping an eye on this year is the New Jersey Devils. They finally got a goaltender, Jacob Markstrom. Anything you're looking at for the NHL this season?
To be truthful, when guys like you throw futures like that at guys like me, you know what we do? I think you know what I'm going to say. We get off these interviews. We go into our sports betting application.
A
future on the New Jersey Devils. So,
yeah.
Oftentimes I have a Montreal Canadiens future. The price has been amazing every year because they have been bottom feeders for a while, but that's sort of my Boston Bruins emotional hedge. I'll come back with the Vegas Golden Knights probably to win the West. Florida Panthers, I live down here in South Florida. Again, I think it stands to reason they're going to be very difficult to beat. I look at this 3-year window and the head coach, and I think they're going to be a real problem. But it's NFL season. And
yeah, that's true.
My twin brother and I are knee deep in it, making 5 picks against the spread on our podcast every week. So that is my handicapping focus right now. But bro, text me anytime you got an NHL future play.
Oh, I will.
Blindly put that in.
Yeah, I got my fantasy hockey draft on Thursday night. Interesting format. You have to pick a player from every team. So there's like 10 of us in the draft. So let's say you pick Connor McDavid. Someone then has to pick another player, and then you go all the way down the list. So where the strategy comes in is you got to pick, like, on bad teams, you got to find that like player you think can do any sort of production. So that's where the skill comes in. Maybe find a guy who's, being counted out or whatever on the team. It's a very interesting format. So
that's fascinating. I mean, I don't have a lot of bandwidth in my life right now, but that sounds like a really good fantasy hockey format for a guy like me. That's a great way to sort of track every team in the league and keep tabs. So that's cool. Well, good luck, man. Who you like on the Bruins, huh?
You know what? I said this before. I think we talked about this in the last one, but I'll mention it again. I think you're going to love Nikita Zadorov. That was a player I was really sad could not come back to Vancouver because he loved it here. I think the Lindholm one you guys are going to regret. I don't think he's a first-line center. I hope I'm wrong, but he did not play that well when he was here. He played well in the playoffs, but during the season, I don't know if he's worth what he's going to get, but we'll see how it pans out.
A lot of money, bro. A lot of money.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Same with Jake DeBrusk. We'd sign him for 8 years, so you would know that too from the Bruins side.
He's a hoss, though. You know, us bossing. I mean, DeBrusk is a hoss. I think you'll like him, but we'll see.
Absolutely. Jon, thanks for doing this. Anik and Florian podcast. Anything else you got going on? I'll give you the last word.
Anik versus Anik, me and my twin brother going head to head, and I'm out of the clubhouse with the lead, so we'll try to keep that going. Can't lose to this guy, but yeah, just keep it going, and we'll see everybody on pay-per-view or wherever you're watching October 5th from Salt Lake City.